And there we go. I actually
got it.
Yeah, we go. No, I actually took off the scary woman Zoom voice because it used to throw off my guests more having it, because it was just like, I'm going to press record in a sec. Recording, stop. So I generally get rid of that, but I do still pre-warn people. But you're sat on an exercise ball, I assume, not just a random ball that you found.
I don't have a ball just a random ball that large. It's large. It is a physio ball, I think is that the official name of it. Yes, I sit on it because during COVID, I also got a standing desk, like a cheap standing desk, because I'm trying to just not sit on a chair because it's just not great for me.
No.
Like for hours at a time. So.
Yeah, I found that. I sit at work, I sit on an exercise ball, whatever kind of ball it is, the same ball as you. Yeah, for about 2 hours a day normally in the morning and the afternoon, just because when I started working at the place I work now, because it's so just not moving at all, my knees started to ache. And it's like, I'm not even 30 yet, so my knees starting to ache already. So
what's your excuse?
Yeah.
That's not okay.
No.
Yeah. For me, it's just not. I also just don't really like sitting. I'm a person who's never really, I'd rather be walking or doing something, or, I can't binge watch shows for the same reason. I can't imagine sitting for that long. I can watch some every day, but I can't but I'm a busy person, so I like to move around.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I mean, normally if I have parties, or rarely nowadays, especially in a flat during COVID, not really.
Party?
Yeah, not one of those. No, one of those. Do you remember those in the ancient times, BC, before COVID? I generally, when I'm in gatherings, I prefer to stand up. I like to move around and things. And me and Megan, we don't binge watch that much. It's normally just after an hour or so, just kind of need to get up, loosen up, and then sit back down again and do nothing for several hours. But you are obviously, as you just mentioned, you are a very busy individual, which is one of the reasons you're on the show. Because if you weren't, then what would we
have nothing to talk about, right? Be awkward.
About balls, that'll be it. That's the bouncy, all the varieties. Right? I really like tennis balls.
That's the whole episode, actually. Balls.
I'm sure Rhea and Tonya would love to be involved in a conversation all about balls.
We should have them join us.
Yeah, well, I'll give them a ring now. I mean, Tonya's the busiest person on the planet, so we'd have to wait for about 2 weeks before she gets in. But I mean, you've done a great amount of things recently, but the most recent thing you've done is you released a comic, which is why don't you tell us about the comic rather than me fumbling my way through it?
Please, then it's you fumbling and not me. I've written a comic and created a comic called Reburn. We're on our Kickstarter for our 3rd and 4th issue. So our 1st and 2nd are out. It's a post-apocalyptic story about a woman, May, who has superpowers, but she's had her memories and her powers taken from her. So it's really about how she puts it all back together, how she finds her partner again, and they find their children, and then what they do with how they rebuild. Like the whole point, we talked about it a lot, especially right before we launched. We didn't really want to make a comic that was about bad shit happening. We just were like, we don't really need to see another woman get treated like garbage for multiple issues. 5 pages is enough. Then we can move on to her ass kicking and taking back her life. Like that's the story we wanted to tell. We're interested in taking it back, burning things down, her being active and empowered. And so we didn't want to do another one of let's show all the ways that this woman has been wronged. Like we all know. We've all read comics and books and live in this world. We don't need to spend a lot of time there. So it should be a lot of fun and empowering and gorgeous. The art by Elise McCall and the colors that start in issue 2 by Hilary Jenkins. I mean, it's amazing. I feel so privileged to be a part of it, because I am not a visual artist. So for me, it's like, I try to describe it to people how gratifying it is. I was actually talking to Molly Mendoza, who does the variant covers for 1 and 2. And I was saying when she sent me the sketch for issue 1 variant, it was like I felt seen in a different way. It was like she had seen me and my thoughts in a way that it was so gratifying, especially as we were all isolated during COVID. And I literally was not seeing people. To have that experience with these women I deeply admire. It kept me going in a lot of ways. because a lot of us, I think, can relate to feeling like, fuck, it's rough out there, and we were being denied our usual ways of coping. And so it was a real gift. And they've all been as a bonus, they're all wonderful people. So.
Yeah, definitely during COVID, it's obviously all the negative stuff aside of COVID, and there is a lot of it. It's at least given people an opportunity, to either breathe and do certain projects, but also motivate them, because especially individuals like you, me, or Tonya, who are like busy bees. I launched a second podcast in COVID. Now we're out of COVID and everything's back to normal. It's like, where do I get the time to do it?
It's really hard, right?
Yeah.
I'm having that issue of finding balance of like, because now all the real world people want to do the things. And then all the virtual people I was doing things with want to do the things. And I'm like, I can't be both. I can't. I have not learned how to clone myself.
Yeah, not yet.
Choices need to be made.
That's secretly what Reburn is all about. Reburn is all about. I told you I'd do it at least once. Reburn. God, it sounds like I'm about to say Roberta, but mess it up halfway and give up. I was going to say with Reburn, there's loads of cool concepts and things in there, which I do want to discuss them. But I want to ask so you started this during COVID. Is this something that you wanted? Because I know it's been... I remember reading, I'm going all over the place here. I remember reading, I think it might have been in the part, I think it was in the back of it was in the back of the first issue where you've got those, and I love the 2 pages where it's you and Elise talking. I really, really like that. I think it really adds to, just a lot. It's really, I don't think I've seen that in comics. Like I see in, certain Marvel comics, they've got the write-in things and stuff, and they're okay. But having you discuss with the artist, I loved it. And in that, I think there was mention of, it was in the production for about a year before it got published, in a sense. So how long have you had this idea, and was it COVID, just an abundance of time that kind of made you go, nope, now it's time to do it? Or what kind of made you write your own comic?
Well, initially, like Jessica Patel, who's like my business partner, she's the editor and producer. We worked together a long time ago, like our first job in Hollywood. We were assistants together, and that was, as you may imagine, not the most fulfilling position one can have. So we became good friends. And I had written a screenplay back then that had one of the characters from Reburn in it. And she really liked it. She's like, keep me posted, cut to years later, I'm now a mother. And I was less interested in the 20-year-old's journey and more interested in the mom and then her children. And that is Violet. The character is one of her children. And Jess read it and was like, you should make this into a comic, because she had just recently worked on V-Wars for Netflix, which was originally a comic. So she was like, I just worked on the show and this would be a great show and comic. And I was like, yeah, I don't have any idea how to do that. That sounds really cool. Like, what? She's like, no, we'll talk about it. And so she started talking to people, and because she had made V-Wars, she knew, some people in comics, and they were like, yeah, everyone has a great comic idea. Everyone tells us this, like, she's like, I have this great idea. It's so exciting. Everyone has a great idea, pat on the back, get the out of here. And then she's like, okay, well, what do I do? What do I do? If I was going to do it, what do I do? So they started giving her like, okay, you write a script, start contacting artists. So we did. We just started, I wrote a script. We started thinking about artists, and we were like, so you just write artists? That sounded like the most bizarre, because in the movie and television business, you don't write people. Your reps talk to their reps, and then whatever, something happens, or most likely doesn't happen. And you just email these people, and we did. And Elise drew for the comic book Maneaters with Chelsea Kane. And so I had read that book and I really loved it. And so we wrote Elise, and then we had a phone call with her, and she was amazing. And it was just like this. And I still talk to Elise regularly, and we're trying to work on another thing. And I love her. Like, as a person, we've become very close because I don't know, it's this crazy, like, anybody who's had a great creative collaboration, it's a real relationship. And this person knows you in a different way than really anyone else. And we have that relationship where we sort of finish each other's sentences and write down what the other one's reading or seeing or thinking, or, like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And we're both very fascinated with cults because of different experiences we've had. And Reburn, not obviously, but the society, the Unity is essentially a cult. So very early we bonded, like talking about cults, and her family is from Albany, New York, where Nexium, a very famous cult, was. And, they had some contact with those people, and I've had contact with. So we have like all these little things in common. Yeah. It's funny how we just like recognized each other.
Yeah. Yeah. There are certain individuals that one meets, and I've met quite a few via podcasting, where you just immediately click with, and you just, there's something, a weird spark there.
Yeah.
There's a variety of different sparks. There's a relationship spark and a more physical side of things spark. But I found the majority of sparks in my life, I click with someone immediately, and I'm just like, within 5 minutes of talking, I'm like, I don't need to explain myself. Normally I talk to people about certain things. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're going too fast, or you're going on a million tangents. I can't keep up with you. Why are you saying these things? What's going on? Why are you talking to me? How'd you get in my house? No, sorry. But it's normally with, you find the right person and it just becomes so easy. And it's so, it's so, it's just really pleasant. It's just really nice. And it takes away a lot of stress from other things. And so in that 100%. Same vein, yeah, exactly. And in that same vein with like collaboration, so specifically with Elise and the artwork itself. So I'm always intrigued. I've spoken to a variety of authors and also comic book artists and things, but I'm always very interested by however the person I'm speaking with, what their method is. So obviously you wrote the script, assumedly, for Reburn, and then did you just send that to Elise and go, here you go, and then she kind of did it? Or I know once again with people when they pick up the comic, you get to see in the back, which is really good insight into behind the curtain in a sense. But from you, like, how was that process of trying to translate it from words to page?
Yeah, it was, I was so nervous, of course, because I'm like, oh, I hope this is a comic book writer sent me their format. So I adapted, I think it was a Marvel format. So I kind of adapted it like for my own purposes, because it's not a Marvel book, and sent it to Elise and said, like, does this work? Do you want more or less? Or, because you just want to make sure you're not stepping on anyone's toes, or I do, like, I want to make sure that I'm not giving them so much information that they feel like they can't make their own creative choices. Like, my goal is to hit that sweet spot where you're offering enough information that they can then go from there. And so that was and so we had a lot of conversations on Zoom about the world and the characters and how they got here. And I see it all in the work. And I'm really grateful that we had that time during COVID where I could sit on a Zoom call for 2 hours and talk about character motivations. Like, I don't know if I have that time now. And I was going to say, when you were talking about a spark with somebody, I think too, another thing it is it's validation for me. It's like, oh, this person sees me and agrees and feels similarly. And then when it's someone that I respect so much, that has a lot of weight for me. So we talked a lot. And each issue we have to talk less, right? Because we know these characters better. We know each other better. But that first issue, and then obviously she did all the character designs. So we had to go back and forth about what they all look like. What does this world look like? How do they wear their hair? What's their clothing? All those things. And I'm always like, here's what I have. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm available. Let me know. There's no dumb question. If you just want to talk about it, I'm here. Like, because I think sometimes people feel like if they have questions, I may interpret it as I've done something wrong, but I don't interpret it that way. I interpret it as they're interested and they want to know more, or they're stuck on something and they want help, so we did a lot of that, just kind of, and we were actually talking recently because we're talking about another project, and she was saying, the notes that I give usually are like something that she has been troubled by. Like, she'll see the note and go, oh yeah, that wasn't quite right for me. And now those are the best notes, right? When when someone is helping you make the thing that you're making better, not making it into something else, which is a huge distinction. And any person who's ever been involved in a creative process knows someone who gives shitty notes. And usually they give a lot of them. That's usually a real sign they're giving shitty ones, is that there's like copious amounts of notes.
Yeah, so don't even write anything. Let me write it for you. It's like, okay, red flag.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't really see this project the same way, you know? And it's like casting in a movie or TV show. Like if you cast it well as a director, you shouldn't have to do a ton of directing because these people are really talented and they're going to do a great job. It's the same way in this collaboration. Like Elise is amazing. I don't need to hold her hand. In fact, my hand will get in the way. You know, she's trying to do something. Get out of the way and let her do it. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
If that answers your question.
It does. Yeah. It's just an insight, you know, this is a highlight of you as an individual. And it just so happens that you as an individual at this moment in time, the sort of the focal point is Reburn. So that's one of the things. So anything that makes you tick, whether you want to talk about, it's free game, however you want to express it. You know, I quite like open-ended questions in a lot of ways to people because it's just kind of fun to see how they interpret it. So, you know, and especially with characters and things, I think one of the things I've really grown to appreciate, and one of the things that I've actually got some disdain for on the opposite side is in comics, the artists I don't think get enough credit. And when I've spoken to, you know, certain artists and things, or authors who do comics and whatnot, and you hear, oh yeah, the artist, it does minimum half of what I do. Like I write the script, but they're the ones you see. What you're seeing, that's them. I've been like, you know, oh, there's a fight scene in a bar, and then you've got like 12 pages of insanity, and they're like, yeah, I didn't write any of that. I said maybe throw them into a table or something, and that's it. And you see the artist do this.
Write like that for sure. I mean, because I've seen them, and I've talked to artists who'll be like, sex scene. You know, I mean, that's not how I write sex scenes. It's like the hand goes here and this goes here and she's there. And this is how, you know, because for me, that's all really important in the relationship, right? Because like if she's on top, it's a very different thing than if she's not on the top. Like we're right there is a big difference. So I'm not just like, hey, go at it, you know, like, because that's not me. But there are people who write like that. And I think I agree that artists don't get enough like applause and attention, which to me is so strange because at least my husband and we can like a book's words, but if the art is not our thing, especially me, I won't read it.
I've read a few of those.
I'll be like, this just isn't, there are certain types of art that I'm just like, I just can't do it. And I will read a book that I might not care about as much if I love the art. And I don't think I'm the only one who looks at comics that way. They're comics. It's not a novel.
Yeah.
You know, it's so emotional and it tells stories in a different way. And you want it to take advantage of all the positives of comics. You want to take advantage of all those if you're telling a story. I'm totally one of those people too. If there's too many words, I'm like, oh God. It's like homework. I'm reading, my husband gave me the Black Widow omnibus for Christmas. I don't know if you've ever read an omnibus, but
I have read them. Yeah, not those ones specifically, but I have read an omnibus. But it's just like, okay. So when you read a comic, especially if it's a single issue or trade paperback, it's like, oh, I'm getting through this quite quickly. When you read a book with short chapters, you're like, oh, I'm doing great. When it's like a really long chapter, you're like, when is it going to end? I'm getting exhausted. And when it's an omnibus, it's like, am I ever going to finish this ever?
Yes. Here is my omnibus. It's sitting right here. And I've read this much.
Nice.
Which is significant. It's like 300 pages. It's like 1971. And I mean, all the love to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, but like, that's a lot of words.
I felt the same when I've read a bit of Alan Moore, and I'm getting into Neil Gaiman as well. And it's like, you read Miracle Man, Alan Moore, and the ideas in it are phenomenal. When he gets it right, it's some of the best comic writing ever. But when he's getting there, you're reading it and you're like, I was reading the first book of Miracle Man, and I was like, this is good, but there's a lot, and I don't see why people hold this in such high regard. And then book 2, I was like, okay, I'm starting to get it. Then book 3, I was like, oh my God, this is one of the best things I've ever read. But it's like, no, book 1 is still, for me, not. And it's same with Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, and some of the sort of the heavy hitters of especially the comic world, when it's like, oh, here's a comic, okay, here's gonna be pictures, you open it, it's like, no, here's a picture and here's all the narrative around it. Oh, it's a speech bubble. That's not a speech bubble, it's a whole speech panel with a bubble of the character.
Yeah, pretty much. And I'm just like, nope. And it's funny because I read a lot of books. I'm a big reader. That's fine, it's a book. But like for me, a comic,
yeah, it's weird.
I'm not there for it. I think too, because oftentimes those books that are like that often are like steeped in mythology and have like all of those references. I don't know if you've read the new Wonder Woman by Kelly Sue DeConnick, the like, it's got a name and I can't think of it, but it's like a big book. And it's a lot of mythology. And I just completely check out. Like yep.
It's cool. I call it almost the intellectual threshold. Not against.
It's
that
okay.
made it sound like I was.
It's okay.
It made it sound like I was calling you stupid. No, that's not what I meant. There's sometimes when you're reading something and either you're tired and you haven't got enough bandwidth in your brain, or like I'll use Alan Moore. Sometimes he'll do basically poetry in his narrative, and I'm like, this is above my threshold. You can talk, you can do crazy poetry and clever wordplay and reference something in the final page that you did in randomly a middle bit of dialogue on the second thing. I don't have that capacity. I'm a generalist in a lot of ways. If you're going to be that clever, it will go right over my head. I'd have to read it like 5 or 6 times to get there. That's what I was getting at. Not, yeah, you're just dumb. You don't get it. You don't get the Wonder Woman mythology. Obviously. No, I've not read that.
Obviously. I mean, it is true. Obviously, it's Wonder Woman. So yes, obviously. But it's like when hobbits start singing. I'm like, oh, I'm out. I'm not here for the singing, actually. So that's sort of how I feel about those things. There's certain things that when they happen now, I've read enough stuff that I'm like, oh, this isn't for me, and I don't like I used to feel apologetic. Like, oh, I gotta like all the things that are important. Because I have an MFA from film school. So there were far fewer women than men. So I was always like, I've seen all the important movies. I've got an opinion on all the important movies. And now I'm just like, you can take your important movie. Like, I don't need to watch another Scorsese movie. I know what it's going to be about. And I know that lady's going to get raped and killed. So I don't need to watch it, actually. And I'll never get those 3 hours back. So I've gotten better at just being like, that's not actually for me.
Yeah.
That movie's not for me. But it is for a lot of people and they love it and it's well done.
Yeah. Here's one of those things as well where, I've found, especially as I've gotten older, I think it's mainly once you get a full-time job more so, is when you go, and then when you have a full-time job and then you've got a million projects on the side, or when you have a podcast, when you start spending your free time doing love work, which is stuff you're passionate about that doesn't pay the bills. And it's like such a huge amount of your time is working, even if it's fun work. So you're like, okay, I only have, if I'm lucky, a couple of hours a day to do anything that's actually fun that I don't have to work at. Because even me, I read books and comics, but I have a podcast about them, so I normally have to make notes while I'm doing it. So it's like, even my fun things, sometimes I have to add work to them. So with that, it's like, oh, I've got a couple of hours. Do I want to spend 2 hours watching a film I'm probably not going to like? Not really. Do I want to watch something that's almost guaranteed? Yes. I don't really personally watch very many depressing people movies. I love people movies. I think some of my favorite movies ever, Peanut Butter Falcon or Way, Way Back and things like that, they're so heartwarming and I love it. But you get other films which are just horribly, horribly depressing for the whole film. And then like Bridge to Terabithia, which sucks. And then the end is awful. And you're like, why would anyone make this film? It's the most depressing, horrible film ever. And it's not even good. It's a bad movie. And then it makes you want to die at the end. Don't.
Yeah.
Oh, it's rough. It's not a good film.
There's a lot of depressing, and that used to be my genre, to be honest. Like when I was in film school, I was like, foreign depressing movies, I'm there. Like I will watch the shit out of that stuff. And I went back like 10 or 15 years later. I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like it's beautiful. Don't get me. I mean, the craft is incredible. And that's part of what I loved about them. But I try to do this with Reburn and the screenplay I'm writing and the essays I'm writing. I try to be engaging and talk about real stuff, but not just make people want to like curl up in a ball and give up on life. It's like, I don't want that to be the end result. I want people to feel, because I finally realized, it took me a while, that I should work on things that I would want to watch.
Yeah.
Or read or consume. And these people who don't like that stuff, they're not my audience. They're literally never going to like my stuff, no matter how much I try to be this like cool chick who likes all the things and is smart and tough and all that. Like, they're just gonna be like, that's a chick. We don't care what she is. She writes stories about women. Like in film school, very early on, I got so much just garbage feedback in film school. And one of the first like criticisms or compliments I got was, I like that you use hot actresses. Please keep doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
then
not
I can sit through your stuff.
Jeez.
Basically. Yeah. And it's like, okay. What do you say to that? You know, like, oh, thanks. No, thanks. I think I was just stunned. I got used to it as time went on, but, yeah, I mean, I always wrote things about women, and I always have, because spoiler, I'm a woman, and I don't think there are enough stories about us that are not like kind of the same tropes that get explored over and over again. And the amount of criticism, it's like, just, well, I wouldn't watch this. Like, no shit, not for you. I know you're not going to watch it. I'm not going to watch your coming of age movie that's centered around football unless it's really excellent, which it's not going to be. No. So it's, anyway, that's my tangent about, I was reading an essay. I'm going to finish it with this. I was reading this amazing essay by Melissa Febos, who I deeply admire. She's a memoirist, and she wrote this book called Bodywork. And it's about, and you can't see it because I'm blurred, but she talks about how there's chick lit and chick flicks, and how nobody talks about dude lit or dude flicks because, well, that's the default. Those are flicks. That's lit. And it's minimizing. I got that a lot in film school too. Oh, so you're going to make Lifetime movies, as if that would be the worst thing I could ever make. Lifetime is a female-centered network that I have never written for, but I would be happy to be paid and write for Lifetime. But like that was the only space we're allowed is, you know, chick stuff. And I don't really think my writing is like that. And I'm really proud of Reburn because it is about women. And if there was a character and the character didn't need to be a man, I made that character a woman. Because I love to see a comic page populated with women. You don't see it very often. And when you do see it, like I did in issue 3, when the inks came through, it kind of hit me. I haven't seen a page where there's just 5 women talking about something. You know, it's those little acts that feel powerful.
Yeah.
To me.
Well, exactly. And I think what it is, and I want to clarify, because if people have listened to one of my not old enough, one of my previous podcasts, I did use the word chick flick, and I got absolutely railed for it because I didn't even,
I think you used it in the one I listened to.
That's actually the one I was referring to, yeah. It was, Rhea and Tonya and Megan all railed me for it because, and, you know, after being railed for it and reflection, I'm like, yeah, everything you said makes complete sense. And yeah, my sister-in-law calls certain movies dick flicks to kind of counter it.
You said that too, and I thought that was, I mean,
it's not common enough, but yeah, it's one of those things. I think like Fast and Furious are kind of counted, but she also said like Scott Pilgrim versus the World is kind of a dick flick. That one, yeah, and I mean, that's one of my favorite films ever, so I'm happy.
I like Scott Pilgrim too, but it is a dick flick.
Yeah,
probably because of the point of view and the center of his, centering his experience. But that is the default too.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. Is the problem is that especially and this is what I try and do on my show as best I can, but obviously I'm not perfect, unfortunately. But you know, as a millennial white dude in England, and also not growing up like ridiculously poor either. I am not in any of these downtrodden social demographics or anything like that. So all I can do is try and listen to people who are just any vaguely different from me and hear their perspective. And one thing I really found that struck me, especially I spoke to some friends of mine who do the In the Black podcast, and they're 3 black gentlemen from America, and they talk about the experience from a black perspective. And they were saying that when they were younger, before reading certain comics, when they would imagine themselves as superheroes, they would imagine themselves as white because you didn't have many black superheroes. And when I hear things like that, I'm like, oh my God, like that's the kind of thing where when I think, okay, my perspective, although I've got a podcast, which is me narrowing on about what I think, is that we need to change what the default is. The default shouldn't be me. You know, there's enough of things that I can consume media in any conceivable facet, and I can find a positive role model for someone who looks, sounds, acts, whatever, like me. And we don't need necessarily any more of that. We've got a lot of that. If there's more cool stuff with that and it's important to the plot, whatever. But when you've got the choice where it, you know, as it should be, it doesn't matter someone's gender or ethnicity or really majority of things that make a person. The individual strokes don't change who they are, and it doesn't define who you are. So if you can just have a character who's got a story to tell, if their gender doesn't matter, which unless the story is explicitly gender specific, then why not have them as a woman if it still works? You know, why not do these things? And I think that when big characters change, like there was the Doctor Who change that some people were annoyed about, and it was just like, we've had so many male doctors, just try it. You know, all that happens is you try this thing, and if it's not that great, you've still got all this other cool stuff. It's not like, right, here's the woman doctor, we're deleting every essence of every male doctor that's ever been ever, and if you read any male doctor stuff, then you're getting put in prison. It's like, no, all this stuff is still here. Let's add different things. And in a really long way of saying it, I think with Reburn, I found that it never felt to me like it was written by women for women. You know, I'm not saying that is necessarily the goal, but when I was reading it, I wasn't like, oh yeah, this obvious bit is because, you know, none of that. I was like, this is just a really cool story, which has got so many cool ideas and so much world building and a mixture of so many genres and things. I was just like, this would be a phenomenal TV show. If this was a movie, I'd probably be like, we need to have a series of these because you're not going to get all this cool lore into one or you're going to ruin it. So I was like, there's so many cool elements of it that I really appreciate. So I want to clarify to any listeners, you know, pick up Reburn, but don't think of it like, don't wrongly assume it's by women for women. It's just a really cool comic that happens to feature women that was also, the creative team is women. So that's the kind of, waffling on about my perspective on these things is quite ironic.
It is your podcast, so you're allowed.
You're
to,
the guest,
is your
though.
Space. I know, but I mean, I think that lots of times those reactions, because obviously we went through that reaction too when like we had female Thor, and I mean, you know, lots of reboots and yeah, it doesn't erase what's come before, and there still will be plenty of cis white straight dudes doing stuff. Like, don't worry, but I think being decentered is just really uncomfortable for some people, and they perceive that as discrimination. And it's not, you know, it's not coming from an anti-white man space. It's coming from a pro, let's represent other. And in that vein, I mean, Reburn is very racially diverse, and we have characters who are not cis, and that was something that was really important to us. The main character is not white, and most of the characters aren't white because it's set in the future. And I mean, if we're all being honest, like, gonna be less white people. So get ready for it. I think that some people, and I think for some white people, that's deeply uncomfortable. That notion of, you know, because there's a lot of power inherent in just waking up, being born white. And I think it makes people uncomfortable to own that, because they feel like it takes away from what they've accomplished or what they've been through. And I think the more you actually reckon with those larger questions, the less that becomes the case. I mean, I'm happy to say that I have privilege. I do. I walk through the world as a white woman. I have privilege. It doesn't lessen the challenges that I've gone through in my life because it's not a competition. So I don't think the same book she talks about how people say there's not enough room for all this representation or all these different narratives. There's only room for so many. And she says, we got to make the room bigger. We don't have less narratives. We have a bigger room. And I thought that was really well put. And because I truly believe that everyone has a really fascinating story to tell. And I have, like, on my Instagram Live, I have people come and share poems based on this poem Where I'm From by George Allen Lyon. And I've done like 23. And I've loved hearing each person's poem and talking to them and seeing how we share things, all of us, and how the super personal actually ends up feeling universal. You know, it's really powerful. And when it becomes less about competition and more about raising all of us up, I think that's really life affirming. It doesn't mean it's easy, but like, what is easy actually?
Most boring things.
Are they even, those aren't easy for me. Those are so painfully like awkward and dull. You know, it's just like, oh God. And I find people who are like in denial about the world or their own family or their own life, like to be so, it looks hard. It looks hard to me, you know? So I don't, you know, there's power, there's like joy in accepting, but life's full of challenges. Let's all help each other. You know, it doesn't make me a Pollyanna, but even if it did, I'd be okay with it. Like, yeah. So that there, now I can get down off my soapbox.
I mean, you are on a podcast to talk about whatever you so desire, including the importance of Reburn and the many parallels, social commentary, however one would like to interpret it. It still has a lot to say. You know, if you can just read it and be like, this is a really cool sci-fi novel. Right. And that it works really well. That's the way I first read it because hey, I'm a massive sci-fi nerd. So that's how I try to read everything, even if it's not.
I'm glad it checked that box. I mean, because that's what you were trying to do, right? Like what I was saying earlier, you want it to be enjoyable.
Yeah. People
don't want to have homework for their free time. Oh, okay, I'm going to watch this movie because this makes me a good person. You know, like, no, that's not a business strategy. Like you have to engage people.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I've literally got here written down some of the notes I've got is just to vague things that would work to explain, just an element of Reburn, which I've got sci-fi, fantasy, superhero, relationships, world building, social commentary, and dystopia. And that's just literally, that's from the first issue, and that's just a array of footnotes. And the first issue is just the introduction, you know, really to the wider world, to the main characters and things. Obviously, there's some really cool stuff along the way. You know, there's especially the bit with a lot of blood. I thought that bit was ace. And I was like,
it was very cathartic for all of us. We really enjoyed that.
I could imagine.
I'll admit it. Yeah, when those pencils came, I was like, yes. It's fun to kill people who suck.
Yeah.
Like that's a fun part of writing things and creating things. It's like, because unless you're a murderer, that's not how the real world works. You know, I'm not a murderer, so I haven't done that. So it's fun to do that in fiction, to have that like, they're done. No more. So.
Oh yeah, totally. With a character like that as well, when when you're introduced to this character, one, maybe two panels, and you're like, yeah, this guy's a piece of shit. Straight away, you're like, I hate everything they're doing. And it's like, is this going to be, very, not, I'm trying not to spoil any part of it, but just talking about issue one is just one of those things where it's like, I don't want this person to be in it and be this big bad forever and have to, kind of as you alluded to at the start, where you don't want to have to watch this woman suffer just for ages. Whereas it's like, no, you can see the pain they went through. You can see the residue suffering. You get to see glimpses of it. That's all you need to know. You need to know there was suffering. You don't need to literally watch it happen to know it happened. Right. You and Elise both do such a good job of illustrating and alluding to things that you don't need to blatantly be looked at in the face and be told, abusive. You can pick that up from what happened and after the fact, and then how the other characters then react to things after it. So I think that the way you tackle that element of things, it works really well, both just as a story, it's thrilling, but also when you look deeper into it, it's really well thought out, I found.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I agree. And I think that's when things kind of go into trauma porn, right? When we have that kind of like, here we are, and this person's like getting the shit kicked out of them. Like, wow. And that's something I think about as a writer. I have a screenplay and someone is dealing with things like that. And it's like, so what do you show and how do you show it? And at what point in the narrative? And those are all questions, because I think a lot of people and characters have experienced terrible things. So how do we as a creative team respect those even fictional experiences, because someone who's reading it has been through something. Like, this is going to bring stuff up for them, and so how do we handle that with care, and how do we handle it so that they feel like, yeah, because that's how I want them to feel when they finish an issue. Like, yeah, I want to keep reading this because this is maybe making me feel some things that are a little uncomfortable, but it's making me feel hopeful and like excited about where this is headed. Not, again, curled up in a ball wanting to sob. So that's my pitch.
It's about projection in some ways as well, isn't it? Is that people perceive characters and project upon them. And as I said, earlier, being cis white male, it's easy for me to project because so many characters look like me. But when you have it where there's important social elements, kind of less is more in a lot of ways. And when it comes to either the blatant abuse or the sort of alluding to there being some fairly obviously, the good thing is with elements of that, and when you see a character overcome it, is that anyone who has been through something that's difficult like that, they can, you don't, to be somewhat vulgar, if someone's been sexually abused and you see it happen and then they get revenge, like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, for example, then a lot of people who consume that content, who've been through something like that, they'll see, I've been through the sexual assault, so that's somewhat, the word isn't gratifying, cathartic maybe for me. Yeah. But if it was just a vague abuse in some ways, even if it's, because abuse is also such a wide spectrum of, horrendous things that can happen to people. And so if you just allude to the fact some has happened, but then you get the aftermath, then I feel like a lot more individuals can then also connect to it as well, without people being turned off by the, just the triggering nature
and the horror of it. I mean, I haven't seen that. I don't want to see that movie because I don't need that in my brain.
Yeah.
Like, I got enough, life has had enough stuff for me, and, and other media. And I think, and like, she doesn't need to be like that abused to want to do the things that she does.
100%.
So yeah, we talked a lot about, Elise and myself, we talk a lot about how comics have this ability to make things that are implicit in relationships explicit. And because, most of us or someone we know has been in some kind of abusive relationship. And Sky and May, the two main characters, are in very explicitly abusive relationships, but not getting punched and hit, in different ways. And, where the sci-fi plays into it for sure. And that's sort of the fun of the genre, is that you can, in comic books, you can make this stuff explicit and people can, like you say, project themselves onto it. They don't have to like see something that they've actually been through. And I think there is safety in that, or that distance feels a little bit more manageable. And seeing someone get hit and they've been hit, that feels kind of like, whoa, that's really close and potentially triggering or uncomfortable, where, someone's getting controlled by a drug or protocol that's a little different than being like tied up. And I mean, that's a thing that I'm not going to do. I don't like that. Whenever I see a woman tied up, I'm like, oh, fuck this again. Like, I mean, we were just rewatching like all the MCU movies with my younger child because he had never watched them. And he was like, let's watch them all. I'm like, okay. Because certain ones I just never watched, like, because I don't like elves. So I had not watched Thor: The Dark World, which I still stand by that decision, by the way.
Yeah, it's not considered. It's probably considered one of the worst MCU movies, and it's definitely in the bottom 5.
I think it is in my bottom 5 for sure. Yeah, it's just like, why are we here on this planet? Anyway, but we just rewatched Ultron, where like Black Widow is tied up, and I was like, come on, really? I'm. It's like Leia. Like, I don't need to see that. Why are women always getting tied up? I'm not a fan. Not a fan.
Yeah. And you're fair to me. I mean, it makes it sound like I'm just virtue signaling, but because I came in to Star Wars younger, I prefer older Leia. I prefer Leia from the sequel trilogy. Although I think the original trilogy of movies is better and the sequels have some issues. It's like older Leia, I just think is a much more interesting, more well-rounded character and really cool. And because when I was young, I was so young when I watched Return of the Jedi, I was like, oh, there's a woman in a bikini. And then when I grew of age, it was already just, but that's Leia in a bikini. That's not, I never viewed her as a sexual object, which is, not that I've not done that for other people in movies. I'm not trying to be like, I'm perfect. I've never objectified a woman in my mind, ever. No, I'm not going to lie.
Well, and she is very much set up to be objectified. I mean, if you did, it wouldn't be like, you're really out of the park with that one. Like, I mean, that's what's happening in that scene. I didn't have that experience of it either. It's just later over time, as you see that image again and again, it's like, oh God, and read about Carrie Fisher's experience of shooting it. And, it's uncomfortable. And yes, people have issues with the sequels, but my husband and I have had this conversation. I'm always like, what do people expect? Like, do they expect some fresh, like, amazing new retelling? Why would they expect that? The prequels are garbage. Like, they're not garbage. The sequels. I mean, I guess I'm just more realistic in my, like, expectations. There were some cool scenes. There was some cool fights. I liked some of the characters. Like, I just feel like Star Wars is a really problematic property. And I think it's hard to satisfy the fan base. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, I will say that as much as I adore Star Wars, and it's my favorite thing in the world, and you will not offend me, don't worry. But I will say the fandom of Star Wars is probably, if not the worst fandom in the entire galaxy, one of them. It's awful. I see a lot of memes where it's like, who hates the people who hate Star Wars more than anyone else is Star Wars fans. Right. Like, most people are like, yeah, I don't mind Star Wars, it's all right. But then you get us fans, either we're like, it's the best thing in the world, or we're like, it sucks. Whereas me, I'm just like, I just love it all. I'm just happy with all Star Wars. Be
right. Are you just happy to love it? Like, that's sort of how I feel. It's like, if you love it so much, unless it's just complete trash, which I felt that way about the prequels, but I know people don't feel that way. But I lived it and like saw them in the theaters and was like, oh, it's still garbage. Like, every movie that came out, I was like, hope, and by the third one, my husband's like, oh yeah, we got to go watch it. And we were like on location and shooting something. And I was like, I do not want to spend like my 3 hours or whatever going. Of course he won and we went and saw it. And I was like, are you happy now?
That's not what I told you so face. I don't know what it is. Yeah. So we've been down this road before. Yeah. You know what I'm saying. I don't need to say it, but I get that look too from Megan.
For me, the sequels were more satisfying than the prequel, and like, because they were just better movies. I know it was a retread of the original.
But there are a lot. I mean, I love all Star Wars prequels, sequels, and originals. But I can see,
a real fan.
I mean, I grew up with the prequels though, so for me, it's different.
Star Wars, your emotional attachment to them is different, for sure.
Yeah, I've always grown up. I don't remember a time in my life where Phantom Menace didn't exist, and I remember Attack of the Clones a bit. So it's like, for me, it's always, I've got the originals, and you got Jar Jar. So for me, it's not been that time where I had to wait and I had to absorb Star Wars without it. It's always just kind of been part of it.
For a long time.
Yeah.
And they re-released the original ones, and they were amazing, and they were gorgeous. And you got to see them in theater in print. I mean, it was just like, God. And then they were like, what? I mean, it's just, it's just, Anakin is like a child. She's interested in it. Like, as a grown-up, it was like, she wants to date him? Like, she's dying because she loves him? So he sucks. And he's a child. What is happening? This was written by a man,
Yeah. I mean, you're echoing a lot of points when Megan said. She was like, Anakin just sucks so hard. He's just the worst. He's just a whiny little bitch. And she's like, well, Luke was a whiny little bitch in the originals, but he was more bearable than Anakin being a whiny little bitch.
And Luke wasn't the love interest.
No, exactly.
Like, he was a whiny little bitch, but you had Han Solo. So, okay. I mean, although I was young, so I did like Luke. And I look back on it like, oh, that's embarrassing. Like, we showed it to my kids. My younger one just does not have time for it. He does not care. And he was like, why is he so tan? Like, that was his big note on Luke. Like, well, he lives on this like desert planet. There's a lot of sun. Ugh. It's not believable. Like, okay, that's not believable. Of the things in Star Wars, Luke is too tan. That's the thing that's taking you out of it. Okay.
Well, I suppose any reason at all.
Yes, but Anakin sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I love Star Wars in many facets, but Anakin is not an individual or character I especially love. So, yeah.
Such a missed opportunity, to be honest, because he should have been so compelling.
Mm.
and charismatic. Like, because Darth Vader, even with all his shit going on, is real compelling, not just because he chokes people, you know, like Anakin, you feel like, oh, it was such, he could have been amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing that's disappointing. You're like, this is like potentially you could have hit this out of the park, but
no, they just
he's just kind of a douche.
Had Jar Jar in it, and then it kind of fell apart from there. I mean, there's other issues with the prequels on a claff. I always rail on Jar Jar, but there are some very glaring issues.
He's easy.
Yeah,
Jar
it's
Jar.
quite easy.
It's not like anyone's ever going to be like, put Jar Jar.
Yeah, no one, unless you're over the, if you're over the age of like 12, maybe 14 at a push, you're like, yeah, Jar Jar sucks. But when there's kids, I would not say that around my friends' kids necessarily, because I know friends of mine's kids love Jar Jar, and that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. My kids hate it.
Yeah, I mean, I hated it when I was a kid as well. But there are,
yeah.
I mean, Megan, when she was a kid, liked him, and now she's like, what was I thinking? It's like, well, not a lot. You are a child. Let's be honest here. There's a lot of things.
You didn't know how racist it was.
Yeah.
You were just like, oh, that's a funny voice.
Yeah. Oh, like, he's silly and funny.
Yeah. That's gross. Yeah.
Well, excuse me, as much, my voice has gone all funny. How fun.
Have you swallowed a fruit fly?
No, not this time. I might have done, but I didn't feel it go in.
Okay, because that could do sentence.
It. Yeah, I mean, that sentence could have gone very differently. But no, no, there aren't any more flying around my room, actually, which is quite worrying. So maybe I did inadvertently swallow a couple of them. But as we round up and get towards the end of this, I did want to ask sort of, with comics in itself, sort of, I know you've got, with the Kickstarter, you've got issues 3 and 4, and at the end I'll let you plug all that sort of stuff, and I'll put links in the description, etc. But with Reburn, do you have like a long-term plan with that? Is it going to be like you have to spoil things, you can tell me nothing. Is it going to be like a limited series? Is there a long-term plan for it? I know you've got the other project as well, which I won't ask about, but like, what was we've heard sort of why you kind of started it and a lot of the information about Reburn, but what have you got for the future of Reburn? What do you want for it? And what do you kind of want people to experience through? I know it's down to interpretation, but what would you love for people to experience in Reburn as well?
Well, the first 4 issues are the first arc. So we were committed to finishing the first arc on Kickstarter. Once we had the first one that was successful enough that we were like, okay, we can do this. We want to continue on. To me, it isn't a limited series because, like you say, there's a lot of world building and there's potential for spinoffs. Like we have characters that are in different spaces that could be spun off. And one is inspired by my friend, Anjali Bhamani, who is going to be a Ms. Marvel. So we're like super excited for her. And she's the voice of Symmetra in Overwatch and Rampart in Apex Legends. So she comes with her. Lots of fans come with her. And then Laura Vandervoort, who's a friend of Jessica's. There was a character that was inspired by her. And Laura was Supergirl on Smallville. So those would be fun to expand on. And we would like to continue Reburn. We're going to, we're hoping to find a publisher because it's a lot for the two of us to manage and the Kickstarters and the finances and just running the business. And we would kind of like to level up and reach out to more people. And we're hoping that these 4 issues, it's like, okay, we have proof of concept. We've proved that we have a story to tell and that we continue to tell stories and that we have fans. And so that's our hope, is to just continue doing it because Elise and I love it. Hillary, the colorist, Joe Matt, the letterer, like we all have had a really positive experience together. And I think anyone who has had collaborations, sometimes they're not as positive as others. And so when it is, it's like, oh, we really want to keep doing this. And like, I haven't been paid, Jess hasn't been paid, but we do pay Elise and Hillary and Joe Met and our cover artists. We do pay them market value for their work. So that has been, when there are moments when I'm like, why are we doing this? This is a lot of work. I am grateful that we're paying these people who I so admire and giving them, from what they tell me, a positive work experience. Like, that's not nothing. Doing that is like saying something, putting something out in the world. Like, I want to pay, because once you get to know artists, you also get to know how many people ask them to do work for free, which I'm just like, why? It's so much work for them. Like, it's intense labor for them. Why would they work on your idea, Rando? Like, they're going to work on their idea or their husband's idea or their friend's idea, or their mom's idea. Like, they have plenty of people who have ideas. So it was always our intention to pay everyone. because I feel we both feel like, especially when people are, although they're very accomplished, but when people are, people do that thing where they go, oh, it's a great experience. You know, we don't pay much or we don't pay at all, but it's for experience. It's like, experience doesn't pay your bills. Experience doesn't pay your rent. Like, it's important to pay people fairly for the work that they do.
Completely. Yeah, it's one of those things where whenever anyone's in any kind of realm of anything, you know, I've got friends of mine who've got a variety of specialities, and they're like, oh, could you just do this thing just for me? You're a mate. And it's like, well, if I'm a mate, then you should be supporting my work. You should see how many hours I've put into perfecting this craft. You know, even asking for a discount is kind of a bit of a situation. But even if you're like, I really can't afford it, but I'd really love you to do it, I'm willing to pay you. Can I get a bit of a discount? Okay, maybe you're all right with that. But that's really mates rates. But when it's like a proper friend, you should be wanting to support your friend. You'd be wanting to give them money for their cool stuff and help them do more cool stuff for other people. So yeah, I'm completely with you on there. So what did you, if there's anything you could want people to experience before we do the final wrap-ups and things, anything you want people to experience about Reburn, or any sort of final words or thoughts on Reburn before we get into plugs and stuff?
I'm just really proud of it. Like I'm not a person who says that a lot. You don't know me, you know, more than this hour conversation, but I'm like proud that we did it and that we stuck with it. We have the same creative team. And I think it's gorgeous.
It is.
The covers are unbelievable. The variants, like, it's a really nice package. And you know, a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, Jess and I were having dinner or lunch saying like, oh, we should do this thing. And we did it. And I think that's something. I think sometimes we're so forward looking, or I'll speak for myself. I'm so forward looking that I don't appreciate what I'm doing in the moment. It's something I'm working on. I'm very much of like, oh, I did it. What's next? I did it. What's next? I did it. What's next? You know, and then you're like, oh, what am I doing? So I'm actually trying to, I'm like, we did this thing. It's great. And I am saying it. I think saying it out loud helps. But it's a great story. And there are a lot of twists, and issues 3 and 4 are really satisfying. Like in issue 3, we go into the Citadel, which is like the capital of this society, and we get Sky's backstory. And then in issue 4, we go and learn more about another character's backstory. And it's just, I'm really enjoying it. And like, I hope readers have that same experience of really enjoying it. And even my kids are like, what happens next? And I'm doing something right if teenagers are reading it. And like my kids' friends are reading it and they're enjoying it. So I will take it.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, there's not a better plug in the world for that. I mean, as, you know, you should be proud of it as well. I will clarify. You know, I have read quite a few comics in my day, and this doesn't feel like an independent comic. This feels like if this was just like, if this came up on Marvel Unlimited or DC Infinite, or whatever it's called, and it was just like, oh, here's a new thing. It's called Reburn. I'd start reading it and I'd be like, this is sick. I wouldn't be like, this feels like it belongs in an indie pile. Nothing wrong with indie comics, to clarify. There's plenty of incredible indie comics, but I want to clarify, in all honesty, when reading it, it doesn't feel like something that's had a Kickstarter, which is nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, it's a great accomplishment.
I know. Thank you. I mean, I know what you're saying. People have said it reminds them of an Image comic, which I take and hold dear, and I agree. It has that feeling because I think the art and the story, and like I appreciate that compliment, Mike. That means a lot. And there is a joke to be made that if you were reading it on Marvel Unlimited, you wouldn't be able to find it, or you know, I guess there's something about the redesign of it that you can. There's a joke there. I don't know exactly what it is, but
there's a joke somewhere. Just pick out where you will. It's somewhere ethereally, just pick it out of the sky. Absolutely wonderful. I mean, this is quite funny because obviously we spoke about, we went on a tangent about Star Wars, which I'm always up for.
Yes, I figured. I mean, you have that in the back, which is a prompt. Millennium Falcon in the back is a prompt.
It's a pretty good one. I mean, when we next speak, when I've got the house, then maybe I'll have to blur the camera because I might have a man cave when I do it. So,
and then I'll feel very sad about my background.
Maybe just for you, I'll have to get like a draped, like a blanket behind me that's just white. I don't have a man cave, no. And you'll be like, but I watched recent episodes with you and you did. No. That's a lie. It's a stock image behind me. Don't worry.
That's right.
But like, there's so many like things that we could have spoken about. I mean, I've got so many notes here. about a great many things. So all it means you're going to have to come back to the show at some point.
I'm happy to come back. This has been a lovely conversation. I was expecting to hit the notes. I was like, he's going to ask me about no, we just talked about what we talked about, which is this is a great conversation. If you don't have to refer to your notes, you know that it was a good conversation. If you're like, she's been talking about this a long time, let's redirect.
Yeah, I mean, when I first spoke with Tonya, I had notes written and we did one of them, which was the first thing I said, and then we nothing else. And then she was like, can we talk about more nerdy stuff and other things? I was like, okay, have to do another podcast. And then, I think I've still, if I went back to because I've got everything physically written down. So I was like, I think if I went back to my OG original notes with Tonya, there's still 2 or 3 points we've never spoken about. And with yourself, I mean, you've got so many things that you've done which people may not be aware of. I mean, some of the notes I've got from a little bit of the research I did. I mean, you've got the movie Eve of Understanding. You've got the short movie In Search Of. You're also the producer randomly, which I found this on IMDb, shows my researching. Producer on Everyday Italian, which is incredible. I mean, my girlfriend's Italian. I'm learning Italian now, and I looked on it, and it's like an Italian cooking show thing. So I was like, there are so many things, and your comic book origin story. I didn't even ask about that, and there's loads of. We didn't even talk about co-writing, essays. So there's an abundance of things to talk about. So it means that I don't have to write more notes when you come on again, because I can just do a little tick next to some of them. Exactly. I'll put links in the show notes, but please tell everyone where they can find you. Tell them about your Instagram as well, because that's delightful. And then I'll stop recording before we end the call. Okay, great. Well, our Kickstarter is live right now for issues 3 and 4. I don't know when this episode is going live. I think it'll still be. It should be. It'll be this month. It will be in not this weekend. Probably not next weekend, the weekend after. So it's the second to last week. I'll post about on social media anyway. Okay. So it might still be that. So Reburn, but you can always check out our Instagram, Reburn Comic, or our website, Reburn Comic. If you missed the Kickstarter, you can see me on Instagram. And Mike's right. I actually feel comfortable there and do interesting things. So Twitter, on the other hand, not so much. But my Instagram is by Alyson Shelton, which is Alyson Shelton. And interestingly enough, Mike, so the poetry thing I was mentioning, Tonya is coming on in a few weeks to do amazing. A poem. So I'm really looking forward to that, because I was on her podcast last year. I don't know. It was last year during COVID. And it was so wonderful talking to her. So I'm excited to have her on to see what she remembers, because it's about childhood, the poem. So it's fun to hear people's recollections of childhood and to talk to them about their process. So, and I have essays on my Linktree, and I'm working on a memoir, and I'm working on getting the screenplay ready to go out there. It's just like you say, you're always doing work, even when you're not working, the fun work. I thought that was a really good point. Like, was that before we started recording? How you just don't okay. I think so. How you don't have time to just do like homework fun thing. It's like, if I actually have time where I'm not doing fun work or work, I want to just be amused. Yeah. Or entertained. And so I've actually realized recently, if I want to see my friends regularly, we need to collaborate. Certain friends. It's like, so we need to work on something together, because then I will see you more often. Like, because Anjali, since she's such a great friend to Reburn, like she's really supportive and wonderful, and she's a wonderful person. But since she's been doing that, I've seen so much more of her, which has been like such a joy, where it's hard with our schedules otherwise. But it's like, oh, okay, we're going to do a signing. We'll show up for that. Yeah. So, that has nothing to do with where you can find me, but that's the story. It's a nice thing to say. I mean, I agree. I mean, there's the amount of conversations I've had with Tonya, which is not, we didn't sit down with a topic. I need to talk to someone about this. I was just like, I need to talk to Tonya because she's awesome. So let's just get her on, figure out a vague subject, which is how I did the feminist podcast. Well, you all took off with that though. Yeah. I mean, you get 3 women and you talk to them about feminism, you're going to have a conversation. Yeah. It doesn't matter what 3 women it is, because that word always brings up conversation. It does. Yeah, and it did. And a lot of people who listened became Patreon supporters because we're releasing part 1 and part 2. Patreon, they get access to part 2 when part 1 drops. So a lot of people, like 2 people became Patreon supporters because they just needed to hear the second half of that.
Aww,
they did mainly say, it was awesome, but it was mainly because they just thought it was so funny how I was getting railed so badly. I just had to hear the rest of it. I just thought it was so funny. You let Rhea, Tonya and Megan come on and they just slate you the whole time. I was like, yeah, it's part of the fun. I mean, oh no, a cisgender 30-year-old white man is being ripped on by a few women. Oh, woe is me. I can take it.
You modeled really good behavior about how you can take those things and they don't hurt you or kill you. It's not like, it's okay. Yeah. If people have things to tell us, we can hear them. Like, my non-white friends, if they have things they need to tell me that I've effed up, I want to hear it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like, oh, just let me keep living in oblivion. Like where I think I'm this awesome person who everyone loves. It's fine. You can tell me if I'm an asshole, like nicely, which they did. They weren't like, Mike, forget you, get out of here. I mean, it was loving railing, in my opinion.
Wonderful. I mean, yeah, I agree.
Definitely don't go out on that.
Oh, I was going to quickly.
Like, oh, that's a difficult phrase.
Well, people can find you. It's fine. Well, people can find you obviously at your website. I'll put a link in the description. Alyson with a Y, Shelton, and then your Instagram is at by Alyson Shelton as well. And yeah, I mean there'll be a Linktree link as well. So be your website, Instagram, and Linktree, which has got all of the exciting stuff that you do. And then I'll put a link to Reburn as well, and I will sing the praises about it on social media as well, as I should, because it's brilliant.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, you're always welcome on the show. I'll talk to you very briefly after I stop recording. Okay. But I'll put notes in the show notes and blah about all that stuff. But yeah, just thank you for coming on. It's been delightful.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all.
And thanks to Tonya for putting the two of us together. She emailed me and was like, I like Mike. I think you two would have a good conversation. It's like, oh, I trust you. If you think so, then I think so too. So she was right.
That was basically the same thing I said to her. I was like, well, she was like, I hope you don't mind me recommending this person to you. And I was like, if you think they're cool, then I'll speak to them. I can't imagine that they're going to be awful if they're friends with Tonya. She is, I think Tonya has quite high standards. So if she considers you one of her friends, I think that's quite a big compliment. Definitely is for me.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Alyson. It's been delightful.
Thank you. Same.